Planned Parenthood was pushing Making Proud Choices at the school committee meeting. And so we had about 80 people show up. We had ordered the curriculum. And so I'm passing out curriculum to people that were interested. As the night progressed and we gave testimony, I was one of the last ones to testify. And I get up there and I read this worksheet. It's called Redefining Abstinence. It was 35 different definitions. One of them was kissing behind the knees.
Oh my gosh.
Let's just pause on that one for a second. That's probably what you're going to use for like the beginning video for the podcast.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Sons of Liberty podcast. We've got our friend back for another episode of the Sons of Liberty podcast, Mike King from Massachusetts Family Institute.
Well, it's good to be here. This is my house, so it's always good to be at my house. Makes it convenient for me, but always good to see you guys. And just really excited that young men are doing things like this.
A couple episodes ago, we interviewed Dr. James Lindsay, and if you'll remember, like we had him for a Turning Point USA event. Kent Scott from MFI came and spoke. He did a great job. That was a lot of fun. And something that Dr. Lindsay brought up in that podcast that pertains to what we're going to be talking about today was how on a global level there are enormous organizations, corporations like Planned Parenthood and these other abbreviated organizations that are working with the UN and the United States as a whole are pushing a very dark, secretive educational agenda on the most vulnerable people in our society, that is our kids in the public education system. And, well, I guess you could argue children in the womb are technically the most vulnerable people in society, but probably a close second. And we asked, and Dr. Lindsay was talking about all the intricacies. I mean, he's so smart. He just talked about the history and all this stuff. And one thing that he brought up, which I thought was super interesting, pertaining to sex ed for young people, he tied that to a Marxist value called sexual citizenship. And it's just insane to hear all of these academic theories from Marxists hundreds of years ago that is now actually being manifested in elementary schools in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to talk about today, because MFI, they have boots. You guys have boots on the ground. You guys are seeing what's going on in the schools. You guys are seeing the curriculum, and that's specifically what we want to talk about. And hopefully you guys are ready to get into it, because we heard Mike talk about this about a week ago, and my mind was blown. I mean, I didn't know, like, it's crazy. You never think it's that close to you. And then to hear a school 3 towns over is teaching, we'll get into it, but it's just like this craziness. It's just wild to me.
We can talk about this in terms of like its history, and, we can come to grips that this has been going on for decades in terms of the planning of this. But really, I think what people listening to this are going to get the most out of is, how is this affecting my kid at my public school? Right. And
because you never expected that it's like in your town, you just don't expect that.
Yeah.
And then you see all these curriculum.
Right.
It's just,
I mean, we call it comprehensive sex education, CSE, right? And comprehensive sex education is pretty much in every school system in Massachusetts. It's probably in every school system, or definitely the super majority of school systems across the nation. And I always make a caveat that, it's in every school system except Leominster, Massachusetts, because, 4 dads won 4 spots on the school committee. We talk about the power of the school committee. And one of the first things they did was get rid of this kind of sex ed. And I know we'll get more into school boards and stuff, but I thought it was really cool. One of the school board members said that they gave an elective to students during sex ed. So they ran on getting back to reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is what we should be focused on in our public schools. And so they gave an elective of math that any student could take during sex ed. So I thought that was really a great, like maybe I would have given an elective of like gym, but I think math is a good one. But you could choose math instead of sex ed. And then they started tying math scores to teacher bonuses and stuff like that. So just to incentivize, more math, for example.
The teachers unions probably didn't like that one very much.
Yeah, I'm sure they weren't a big fan of that. Student outcomes. We don't want good student outcomes in Massachusetts. Yeah.
I was thinking that'd actually be a really good idea before we get into the specifics of the curriculum, just to explain to maybe the parents watching what is actually, how is sex ed different now than the way it used to be? Because it's not like it's a new thing. It's just
Sure.
changed. It's evolved into something that is completely inappropriate,
Yeah.
not evidence based, not age appropriate, and it's hurting. It's now detrimental to the kids, and it's
Yeah.
like making them. It's implanting thoughts that they should not be thinking. Just because I guarantee a parent's just watching this and be like, okay, well, is it really that bad? Like I went through it. Like it wasn't that. It was just all the.
Right.
It was just it wasn't that bad. It was just
Right.
the basics. The
Right.
birds and the bees.
Right.
But it's so much more than
It
that.
is. Yeah. So we did a deep dive at MFI when they wanted to redo the frameworks. The DESE, Department of Elementary Secondary Education, wanted to redo their frameworks. And so we had put out a bunch of information on this. I think anyone that wants that information can text the word frameworks to our short code 87891. But I made some notes here. So students in pre-K, this is 2 to 4 year olds, according to the Massachusetts frameworks of what would be age appropriate, medically accurate, and evidence based, right? So they discuss genitalia in preschool, 2 to 4 year olds, learn about radical transgender ideology through things like the gender unicorn. They normalize diverse family structures that wouldn't necessarily be something that a lot of parents would be in favor of. So again, you're pitting the kid against the parent, which happens a lot. Because what happens is you have this kind of psychological thing going on at school. And imagine, we forget what it's like to be a 2 to 4 year old and how we take these concepts and we believe them so quickly, right? And so, Johnny, who's 4, comes home to dad and says, well, that's not what the majority of my friends think at school, and that's not what my teacher thinks. And guess who's the only one that disagrees with my teacher and my peers? My parents, right? And then just undermining, family beliefs. And that's preschool, right? And then we get to grades 3 through 5, as young as 8 years old. They're discussing sexual intercourse in grades 3 through 5. So this is, again, 8-year-olds. Learn about radical transgender ideology, which we can see this is a pattern that's happening in every single age group, the whole transgender ideology. And then outside resources without parental consent. So again, pitting parents against their own children. We're talking about 8-year-olds here, but I think I brought up the example in Lowell, Massachusetts, where a 16-year-old girl got a medical surgery done to implant birth control in her arm. I think it was 3 years of birth control, and it's a medical surgery to put it in and to take it out. And the only way that dad found out about it was because the 16-year-old daughter had irregular bleeding. Right. And so he's wondering what was going on. And all of a sudden he finds out that the school had, referred to this clinic, this girl, to go get this implant. And these people that work at the clinics think that they are like doing the Lord's business because, my goodness, we wouldn't want an unwanted pregnancy. That'd be the worst thing ever. And we're saving this girl, from so much pain and suffering. Right. Which is, I think, a lot of the thinking there. And then students in grades 6 through 8, as young as 11 years old, positive outcomes of sexual activity as young as 11.
My gosh.
Analyze readiness for sexual activity, and then learn where to access abortion. At 11.
At 11.
So this is great. This is middle school, right?
That's coinciding with our state trying to lower the age of when you can access abortions.
Well,
which is just kind of
what's crazy
It's not
about
11
this
yet.
is statutory rape is what, like 16 or younger. There's already laws on the book about how this is like illegal, right?
Yeah.
And yet we're teaching middle school students, how to have sex.
Yeah.
This is like we're teaching them how to do illegal behavior, basically.
Yeah, you'd assume that if the law is already
That's a good way to
16
think
and
about
under, that common sense would tell you, oh, maybe we shouldn't teach it until 16
Yeah.
because they're actually not allowed.
Exactly. Yeah. And then
Can't have
there's-
common sense.
And there's websites called abortionfinder.com, right? That you could put in your zip code and find the nearest abortion clinic. Now, wouldn't it be nice if they had like pregnancyresourcecenter.com,
Yeah.
right? And you put your, but right now there's,
Is that like a? Do you know specifics about that? Is that like a government thing?
I'm sure it is, Planned Parenthood or, something like that. But, I mean, it's just crazy because in Massachusetts, we have the $1 million smear campaign right now against pregnancy resource centers. And we're literally giving the abortionfinder.com at school. It's just,
So this is like
beyond the pale.
the abortion industrial complex. Basically, they push it, they funnel it through the schools,
Yeah.
and then now it's a $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
And it's like we've got thousands of more customers.
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood for you. That, by the way, the government funds Planned Parenthood.
Yeah,
so
I mean, think
it's
about
a whole racket.
I mean, if you're Planned Parenthood and you've got this whole market open to you, which is every single student in the nation, my goodness, like what? That's the best marketing plan.
Well, yeah, and that's
ever.
why
Yeah.
they have a hand in in these curriculum.
Yeah.
I mean, something you said was that all roads lead back to Planned Parenthood
Yeah.
when it comes to all these different sex education curriculum.
Yep.
And just to be clear, these come from the state level, right? From the state level department.
Yeah, right. This is DESE. This is Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Just think about it too. I mean, you're selling all your contraceptive, through the sex ed program at your local public school. And even Monica Klein, who used to work for Planned Parenthood, teach their sex ed, would say that, when you can get a sixth grader on board with this, you've got a client for life, which makes total sense because, again, we forget what it's like to be a sixth grader and how, again, easily influenced you are. And your teacher's telling you this, your peers are telling you everything's fine. And then you start becoming sexually active and you have all the contraceptive. I mean, it is the best business plan you could ask for. And then, students in 9th through 12th grade, so as young as 14, are having subjective discussion regarding sexual orientation. So this is where a lot of the orientation conversation starts to come into play. And then, of course, the transgender ideology is just from pre-K through 12th grade.
Now, why do you think that is
I don't know.
pervading
That's a
every
great
level?
question.
That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it's because you can easily justify, because you brought up the gender unicorn. It's like you can easily put up transgenderism as just, it's just another way some people live life. And hey, kids, like you might feel this way, but some people feel like this, and it's totally okay, and you need to accept that. And like maybe it's because it's easy to market it as just being respectful and just like treat people, be a good neighbor and treat people kindly. And it's like, we're just using transgenderism as an object lesson to teach these kids how to be nice to everyone. And maybe that seems like I feel like that'd be what your average, woke preschool teacher might tell you,
Yeah.
I have no idea. That's just speculation.
Yeah. I mean, we'd all be spitballing, but I don't know, but it is an interesting thing to take notice of and be like, why in the world are we teaching this as young as, 4-year-olds and then all the way through high school? And then another very familiar trend is the undermining of family beliefs, right? So the traditional family is, you can legitimately say, is under attack through the sex ed programs in our schools, and we talked a little bit about this before, but it's like, I talk to parents a lot in Massachusetts who, Johnny, Jenny come home and, they say, Mom and Dad, you're out of touch, and it's like, how did I become out of touch? You're out of touch, not just, on maybe like certain things, but you're out of touch on things like gender and orientation, which are major foundational belief systems, right? And I think a lot of parents just end up getting caught off guard and like, what in the world happened to Jenny at school? Or they don't even know, they don't even realize that it's happening at school. More and more parents are realizing that this is happening at school. But
Another thing about that. What a way to plant a seed in a child that might be a Christian, because you have Christians sending their kids to public schools, and the kid goes, okay, my teacher is teaching me this, never mind evolution and all that.
Right.
But they're telling me that men can become women and women can become men, but the Bible says that God created them male and female.
Right.
So that's just another, aspect of the way that public school undermines the exact thing that a Christian, that's like one of the first verses that they would read, your kid would know that, and it's completely undermining the Christian faith.
And I think you couple that with, we talked about this earlier, of the lack of a biblical worldview being taught in our churches, but then also just the lack of defining these things from the pulpit, on a Sunday morning, of gender and orientation. I mean, one of the biggest critiques of the modern day church is that they're not talking about these things, and they're leaving a vacuum for the school to define these things. So you're absolutely right. So, I think that gives we could talk for hours on the detail of what's being taught in the public schools regarding sex ed, but these are really the frameworks that the state of Massachusetts is saying, we want you to stay within these, we want these kinds of subjects to be taught. And having said that, a lot of people don't realize that in Massachusetts, there's no law that says you have to teach sex ed. Right. So like in Leominster, they're not, doing anything against the law, doing anything illegal to say we're not going to teach sex ed. So good for those 4 dads.
Yeah.
So this is not something that conservatives could just be like, oh, it's being pushed on us from up above. There's nothing we can do about it. This is actually something that
absolutely
can be changed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sex education is not mandatory. Yep. And neither are the frameworks. A lot of people, and of course, DESE's not going to put out marketing that says, hey, you don't need to do this,
right.
Yeah. And then what I'll talk about here too is the 15 harmful elements of comprehensive sex education. So, and we talked about some of these already, but sexualizes children, teaches children to consent to sex, normalizes anal and oral sex, promotes homosexual, bisexual behavior, promotes sexual pleasure, promotes solo mutual masturbation, promotes condom use in inappropriate ways, promotes early sexual autonomy. Again, pitting parents against students. Sexual rights, right? These are, mom and dad, like, how dare you take away my sexual rights?
This is my sexual citizenship.
Yes, yeah. I am a global citizen of the sexual world. Fails to establish abstinence as the expected norm. So I've shown this chart before where, these schools say, we teach abstinence. It's like, okay, it's like one little line and you have 30 other possibilities, that you can use. Promotes transgender ideology, promotes contraception and abortion to children, promotes peer-to-peer sex ed or sexual rights advocacy, undermines traditional values and belief, undermines parents or parental rights, and then refers children to harmful resources. So all 15 of those, when we do an analysis like we've done for 110 towns and cities in Massachusetts now from public records requests, we go through these harmful elements to see if those are in the curriculum.
That's wild, man. So can you talk about some of the specific curriculum that is being used? And then can you tie it to the towns in the areas in this area?
So Planned Parenthood has 2 that are probably the most well-known: Get Real and then Making Proud Choices. So some ingenious marketing going on here. Our Whole Lives is another curriculum that's put out by the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ.
Interesting.
So I think Jesus would be totally on board with these curricula, I'm sure. But those are, you also have Girls Inc., you have Advocates for Youth and the 3 R's. So again, genius marketing, right? Because we would think, when you think of the 3 R's, you're like, oh, reading, writing, arithmetic, right? But it's not that. It's rights, respect, and responsibility, right? So these are my sexual rights, and you better respect them, parents, right? And then, whatever responsibility means, which I'm sure is not an accurate definition of what we would think would be responsible. And then, in different towns and cities. So I would just say, of the 351 towns and cities in Massachusetts, pretty much all of them are teaching some form of comprehensive sex education. We've put together a interactive sex ed map on our website. So if people want to text their town or city name to our short code 87891, you will most likely get a return text with an analysis we've done from a public records request regarding the sex ed that's being taught in your town or city. So for example, the epicenter of the sex ed opt-out movement, which we can talk some about, where last year we had 4,000 students opt out of sex ed in the city of Worcester. For the third year in a row, we've had record opt-out numbers. So we're almost up to 20% of the 25,000 kids that attend school in the Worcester Public Schools. K through 12, because they teach advocates for youth, rights, respect, responsibility in their sex ed. And so, if you were to text, for example, Worcester to 87891, you'd get an analysis of the 3 R's curriculum. If you were to text, for example, Milton, Massachusetts, right, to 87891, you'd get an analysis on the Get Real curriculum because they teach Get Real in Milton, and then so forth and so on for other towns and cities. So I think that's a really helpful, useful tool for parents in Massachusetts. I'm not aware of any other family policy council that has that kind of tool where you can text your town or city name to our short code and get that kind of information. And I think now we have 75 towns and cities in Massachusetts that have started some kind of opt-out movement.
Wow.
Which has been fabulous. And
are those from are those members of the school board leading the charge, or is it like separate?
It's just parents.
Garden groups or like separate parent groups?
Yeah, I think these are just parents that have been in touch with Massachusetts Family Institute. We've educated them at an event like you came to for Moms for Liberty, for example, and they've started to tell other parents, in the town or city. So yeah, it's been good. So 75 different towns and cities out of 351. So if I do quick math, that's like 25% of Massachusetts towns and cities have some kind of opt-out movement. And we're super thrilled to see that. And I think, what happened in Worcester. So this has been going on for 3 years, right? So we showed up, 80 of us showed up at the school committee meeting in Worcester.
I want to hear this story. Can you tell this story?
Yeah. So this was, actually, I think it went back to like 2019. And I remember it's like some of those, I'm sure you guys same way, certain times of your life, certain events in your life stick with you, right? And in my time with MFI, I refer to it as like dropping a cultural bomb or something. Like something happened tonight, and that's exactly how I felt on this Thursday night, rainy night, Thursday night in February in Worcester. At the city hall, I believe, and it was a school committee meeting, and we knew that Advocates for Youth and their whole group were going to show up and really push this was Planned Parenthood was pushing Making Proud Choices at the school committee meeting, and so we had about 80 people show up, and the balcony was filled, the bottom level was filled, and I was in the foyer. We had ordered the curriculum. And so I'm passing out curriculum to people that were interested, and I think the other side was handing out cupcakes. So whatever, like we could have brought maybe some food with us. But anyway, as the night progressed and we gave testimony, I was one of the last ones to testify. And I get up there and I read this worksheet. It's called Redefining Abstinence. So you would think, abstinence,
abstinence.
Yeah, like super easy to define. Like 2 words. 2, abstain.
Just don't.
Yeah, just don't. And instead, it was 35 different definitions. One of them was kissing behind the knees.
Oh my gosh.
Let's just pause on that one for a second. But
I don't know how to react.
That's probably what you're going to use for like the beginning video for the podcast.
Montage it, yeah.
No, but I mean, we're laughing about it, but yeah, kissing behind the knees, which I didn't even know was a thing. But they're saying that this is abstinence, and basically saying, basically what they're saying is anything outside of sexual intercourse, right,
is considered
abstinence, right? Even though I think if I remember correctly, there was something on that list that was like intercourse. And I was like, guys, come on. Like that's not abstinence. Anyway, they gave me 3 minutes to speak. And so I just read straight out of this worksheet and you could hear a pin drop. I mean, it was like, people were like, what is this guy reading? And the superintendent of schools was there, the mayor was there, and then the school committee. So, we made our point that night and we defeated Planned Parenthood that night. They decided not to adopt making proud choices in the second largest city in New England.
See, if you had done that in like 2021 or 2022, you would have gone mega viral.
Right.
Because that was in like, you kind of started doing the school board thing before it was cool.
Yeah.
You know? Because I think 2020, like late 2020, and then as schools started to open back up, after parents were seeing what their kids were being taught over Zoom class.
That's right.
The next 2 years or so was like, that was the things that were going viral in the conservative movement.
Yeah,
it was
because
just
you had
moms
the
showing up at
videos
school board meetings.
coming out of Virginia, you know,
Oh,
and that's really, I think, where it started, at least started to get viral.
But anyways, what a cool story. I mean,
so
that's
I remember like coming home that night, you know, and just driving home, getting home and sitting at my dining room table, just kind of take a breath. Cause it's like, you know, those kinds of experiences are just kind of weird to begin with. And, you know, the impact and the people on the other side, just so visceral, you know, I mean, just like, we want this kind of sex ed for our children, you know? And so they decided not to teach making proud choices. So it was about 1 or 2 years later, they really started to push the 3 R's, the rights, respect, responsibility in Worcester. And so again, this was during COVID. So a lot of meeting online. So we had a lot of parents join the online school committee process. And the majority of parents that showed up were against the 3 R's because a lot of the same stuff, not medically accurate, not evidence-based, not age appropriate. And you could tell that the school committee was like, whatever, like we have the votes, we're going to push this through. And so I remember I was on a Zoom call on this meeting and I was in a parking lot of some like retail store or something because I pulled over and it had good service at the time of the meeting. And anyway, I say almost like prophetic, I'm like, you guys can go ahead and pass this thing. We all know you're going to do it. Okay. But you will spark the largest opt-out of sex ed movement in the history of Massachusetts. So I'm like, go ahead, do it. And that came true because that first year we had almost 3,000 opt-outs. The second year we had 3,700 opt-outs. Last year we had 4,000 opt-outs. And this year we're hoping to have like over 5,000 or more opt-outs. And then it also sparked 75 more opt-out movements across the state. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, I haven't done total research on this, but I don't know of any other state that has 75 opt-out of sex ed movements going on, and a city, the second largest city in all of New England, that has almost 20% of their student body, K through 12, has opted out. Like there was one case in Worcester where a third grade class, half the third grade class opted out of sex ed.
Wow.
And I always tell people, I'm like, imagine if you're in class and half the kids get up and go to the library because they've opted out. Like that's a powerful statement to send to the teacher and the other students to say, I'm not alone on this. Because that's what was happening. Like one kid was opting out, you know, and then he'd always be like, Mom, come on, I'm the only kid. Like, don't do this to me, you know? And like, no, you know, and you had this horrible situation, which you feel bad for the kid, you know, but to have half your class, you know, walk out was powerful. So as I mentioned, that then sparked, there was an article in the Worcester Telegram and Gazette where 1,000 kids left the Worcester Public Schools like a couple years ago. And so we're like, well, where'd all the kids go? You know, and a lot of them started homeschooling and going to private schools. And so then
the statistics for homeschooling again?
So
since COVID?
there's different statistics on this. But I think the point is that homeschooling has significantly increased in Massachusetts, very significantly. And we were kind of looking at this and saying, okay, like, all these kids are leaving the public schools, not just in Massachusetts, but all over the nation. And so we want to create a solution for that. And that's where we came up with the church-based learning center idea where, you know, when you had a parish, when you start a parish or when you start a church years ago in America, you not only started the church, but you started the school.
Right.
And we kind of got away from that. And we've kind of, you know, outsourced that. We've outsourced it to the government, which we never should have done. And so I think what's happening now is more and more churches are saying, whoa, like, let's reclaim education. And churches have two things. Well, churches have two things. You have affordable, available space. Because how many churches do we know that have these wonderful buildings
that aren't used,
that are empty during the week, right? And then you have all these volunteers, like even, you know, grandmas that, you know, retired from teaching, have these incredible degrees and are just like whatever they're doing in their retirement, which I'm sure is great, but you could be
more important things.
You could be like helping the next generation of kids get a great education, right? And we're seeing more of that. So now we have 20 church-based learning centers, which have started in the past 2 years, and we want to see that number grow to about 40. And we think it can. We think it can grow much larger than that, because how many churches do we have? We have, according to Secretary of State's office, we have 8,000 churches in Massachusetts. So I think the future is really exciting for what the church is going to do.
It's interesting in other states across the nation, you've got very Republican states and, every level of government, so to speak. But you can still go into these schools, but the left still has a foothold in these quote unquote bright red states, because you go into these schools and this is what's being taught.
Yeah.
It's like no one's noticing it.
Yeah.
And this is what's still being taught. And that's why, and you've got all these, insanely liberal camp colleges in the middle of a bright red state. It's like education is 100% the one thing that doesn't matter what state you're in, the left controls it.
Yeah.
The left controls it. And I think what's so interesting about in Massachusetts, there really are no patches in the state where it's very red. It's kind of all blue.
Right.
Basically all blue.
Yeah.
So we're starting from ground zero, and it's forcing us, like we have no part of Massachusetts that we can be like, well, I may live in a bad part, but at least over there it's pretty good. There's no way to just passively go about discussing these issues.
Right.
And when every part of Massachusetts is deep blue in entrenched, and I'm not even talking just like politically blue, but with the ideology, it forces you to take ownership. And something that Dr. Lindsay was talking about, you can obviously tell I learned a lot from Dr. Lindsay. Yeah. Something he was talking about on the podcast was when the origin of public schools came out of not a need for an education, but a need for a daycare, because it started during World War I. The men went off to fight the war. The women worked in the factories to make the things to fight the war, to make the weapons to fight the war. But kids had to go somewhere. Yeah. So then the public schools were invented and it became a daycare. And now it's like we as Christians take this opportunity, especially here in Massachusetts, to look at it through a lens of taking ownership. We were just talking about, taking extreme ownership. Use this as an opportunity to take extreme ownership over your kids' lives.
Yeah.
And before you started filming, you were talking about the when you send your kid off to school, the amount of time that you lose investing into your child.
Yeah, I mean, we were saying that, here I am, 12 years ago, I'm the director of marketing for a Christian school in Massachusetts. And so I'm out there telling people to come to this Christian school, and I go home and my wife and I are having a conversation about homeschooling, where, my kids can go to this school for free because I'm, a director at the school. So I'm like, honey, you do realize we don't make a ton of money, and our kids can go get a Christian education for free. But she showed me the chart, which was, okay, but if our kids are in school, wherever they are, they could be at the best Christian school ever, but from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's 40 hours that they're just not with us, right? And then, so when you look at it from a sense of time, just time, right? I mean, time is probably the most important piece of this, right? In terms of you parenting your child. I mean, you could make the argument that the school is parenting your child more than you are, right? From an aspect of time, right? So that was really convicting for me in that whole debate. But it's been very encouraging to see so many more people homeschooling, and these church-based learning centers are really just we call them an expanded version of a homeschool co-op, right? So we're not asking pastors to start a school. We're just saying take that traditional homeschool co-op that meets once a week, and have it meet 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week. And it's still parent directed. The kids are registering as homeschoolers. And what's been really cool to see is in this past year, as we've gotten more momentum on this and more churches are coming on board and saying, yeah, I can do that because I have available space and I have, some volunteers in my church that are willing to do this, and we can keep this super affordable. Like one learning center does it for $500 per family per year.
Wow.
So who needs
crazy.
So who needs a school voucher? When you can do it, and that's the church can do this. That's why we're saying like you need to reclaim education and see this as a ministry to your community. And what better ministry than to have K-12 kids in your church building 3, 4, 5 times a week for however many hours a day. And now we have outside organizations that have become aware of what we're doing in Massachusetts, like the Children's Scholarship Fund, which is $1 billion scholarship granting organization. And the lady that leads it is a born again believer. I met her about a year ago at a conference, and right when I gave her the vision, she's like, yes. So, like she had already been thinking about it. She's like, because she knew the church was key to reclaiming education in America. So they've decided to give us a $75,000 matching gift program, pilot program. And when it's already $500 per family per year to go to the Learning Center, that money can go a long, long way to reach more and more kids. So this fall, we're launching our first ever 50% scholarships to students that want to attend a church-based learning center. And then on top of that, you got the Herzog Foundation, which is a $350 million Christian foundation. And they are willing to train up the next generation of, proctors and tutors that want to start church-based learning centers. So someone on our staff, Dr. Rondeau, had written a schoolbox, an online schoolbox that is basically how to start a church-based learning center. And Herzog promotes that. And so basically, if you get trained by Herzog, they will create even your own website for your church-based learning center at no cost to you.
Wow.
So we just had like the Rochester Learning Center down in Rochester, Mass. They went through the school box for church-based learning centers, and now Herzog has already created their website, and they got 17 kids, and they're off and running and now they're getting the scholarships. So you got the training, got the funding, got the church. So like this whole ecosystem has already formed for the church to step into it.
Yeah. And I think an important aspect maybe that we should acknowledge is it's going to take like a mass repentance almost in a way from the churches, because this is not just as simple as like the government, told us to do this and we just, accepted it. Like this was years and years of like
passivity,
right? And it's like, it's so easy to just, I'm going to send my kids to public school and it's going to be fine. It's going to be all those things. And the Bible says that judgment starts in the household of God. So almost in a lot of ways, you see those kids who, like we were talking about earlier, kids who, why is my kid going astray? I raised them in a Christian household. We were Christians, but we sent them to public school.
Right.
And it's like that, in a way, a generation of kids who were raised in Christian homes but didn't end up keeping that faith is a judgment.
Right.
In a way, on America and on a family, because you have to continue the legacy, and if you're not actually doing it actively, what are you doing?
Well, what's the main critique of homeschool parents? Like your kids aren't going to be socialized, and it's like, well, you're right. My kids aren't going to be socialized by the public school and the peer group that they have, because they're all being socialized with socialism and all kinds of different things. At our public schools by their peer group. I mean, you like you're telling me as you're coming at me as a homeschool dad, right? And you're telling me that somehow the socialization that's happening at school is more healthy than me as a parent socializing my children. Like that's just ridiculous to me. And when you look at the statistics, I mean, to your point, I think it's 70, 80, 90% of kids in our churches are still attending public schools. And this is why I get more and more excited about the Church-Based Learning Center, because like you look at the Grow Learning Center in Worcester, largest Hispanic church started this learning center. They'll have about 100 kids this year. And they're doing it for like $200 per month or less, right? And just to see what these churches are doing is just phenomenal. And the point I was thinking about was 70% of the Worcester population, the school population, lives under the poverty line. This church, 60% of the kids that go to this church-based learning center live under the poverty line. So the church is meeting the same need that the public school is when it comes to these kids that could never have afforded an educational alternative outside of the public school.
And this is the textbook formula to keep power out of the hands of the government, is to have the church do it.
Yeah.
And when you have the church feeding the widows and orphans, you don't need a social welfare program that is just going to increase the size of the government and make us as Christian and steal our money and make it harder for us to be generous to the less fortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's super exciting. And then so we've talked about, the opt-out. There's 3 layers of the education mission that MFI has, right? So it's the opt-out movement first, as kind of like, what's the first thing parents can do, right? Because parents a lot of times just get overwhelmed. Like, what can I do? Opt your kid out, right? And then as we saw in Worcester, then we had a public school exit, right? So then we're like, okay, we need a solution for these kids. So then we said church-based learning centers. And then as all these kids were coming out of the public school, we're like, well, so much investment has been made in these schools and so many kids are still in these schools. So we don't want to just abandon the public school. So how do we have some say, in our schools? How do parents have say in their schools? School boards, right? I mean, Hunter, obviously you can speak personally in this, where you're one of the youngest people I've known that's ever run for school board. But just to see what we've been able to do with helping school boards pass really good policy, right? Like Dighton Rehoboth, right, in Massachusetts is an amazing story. Maybe within the past year, I think they passed no political bias on the school board, which basically said, everything from like sexuality flags to, anything political, right? We're just going to take politics, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on. Let's just take politics out of our schools, right? And then they passed recently a safety in women's sports policy, and they passed it 10-0.
Wow.
10-0. And basically what it does is it empowers the coach to forfeit a game if he feels like there's a boy on the other team that would endanger the safety of the girls, right? So that coach is no longer out on this island thinking, I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to, whatever he's thinking or she's thinking. And so I believe there's another, I know there's another school system, I won't say who it is, that is looking to pass this same policy. And a lot of times this kind of policy is just a common sense policy. That I think a lot of times school boards are intimidated by, the ACLU or whoever it might be. Oh, we're going to get sued, right? Or whatever. Well, MFI can come in and say, look, we have First Amendment attorneys, not just here on the ground in Massachusetts, but also nationally with Alliance Defending Freedom and First Liberty. And, these are, ADF is like a $75 million pro bono Christian attorney organization, right? That you got on your side for free.
Yeah.
So it's been very encouraging to, like we were talking about Sutton, Massachusetts, where, a drag queen shows up 6 months ago at the Connections conference and dances on a table for 5 minutes, and no one ever did a Corey check or a sorry check. And you got 14-year-olds watching the drag queen in a hot pink mini skirt, dancing on the table. Right. So of course it offends a lot of people. So they created this great parent alliance in Sutton. And long story short is they flipped their school board 2-3 months ago. And within the past 2 months, I just found this out, the superintendent left. The Connections conference got canceled.
Wow.
That was just in 2 months. So just the power of what a school board can do. And then they have other plans that I won't get into right now. But
episode 3.
But like a town like Sharon, not conservative, and they flipped their school board, and they ran on not getting rid of honors classes, which I thought was genius, right? Because like, again, it's academic excellence, right? We want to get back to academic excellence. And of course, I think behind a lot of that thinking was, well, we don't want diversity, equity, inclusion, and these kinds of things that are really SEL, social emotional learning, and all these things that are really not creating academic excellence in our schools. So to see, the spectrum, again, this just happened 3 months ago. Sutton flips their school board. and they're kind of more for Massachusetts on the more conservative end, and then Sharon on the more liberal end flips their school board. So you don't have to be a conservative town. That's why I say, like, people on both sides of the aisle get it when it comes to safety in women's sports, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and when it gets to just academic excellence.
I mean, from a political perspective, this makes sense. The highest voting block in Massachusetts is independents. 800,000 independents in Massachusetts. 400, and then maybe like around 600,000 Democrats. I'm not certain about that number, but then 400,000 Republicans. So by a lot, there are majority independent voters. So it makes sense that you can persuade parents across the aisle in either direction. Like, hey, we want to protect our kids, and to put that as the North Star of protecting our kids and valuing academic excellence. That can, I mean, just from a political strategy perspective, I suppose. Yeah. That can do a lot of good down the road.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's safe to say we as Massachusettsians, I suppose, should see the school boards as step one to working our way up the ladder in putting these in applying a biblical worldview to policy. Would you say school boards, like, number one, that's going to be the most effective, the best way to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say another thing too is that's interesting, that's surprising and good, is that the media actually covers these things. Like, I saw the DR, Dighton Rehoboth.
Yeah.
I was watching the news in the morning and it came up. Dighton Rehoboth does this thing where, the coach can just quit the game for safety. And like, they actually gave a fair, it was like Channel 5, Fox News, and they gave a fair assessment of it. And they let the superintendent speak and say, look, we'd rather lose a game than risk one of these girls getting hurt.
Well, this was the same school district where the girl on the field hockey team got her teeth knocked out by a boy on the Swampscott team. I mean, that was a horror show.
Yeah, so it's taking advantage, because a lot of this, the problem with the school committees and all that, is that the left controls them, so they control the narrative of what is brought up in school committees.
Right.
And a lot of it is literally just, this is what it is, like you did in Worcester. Like, you learn, you go on MF5's website, you learn what it is, because, I think that is there's a gap in knowledge. It's not people that know these things and are just, we're just going to allow it to happen. Most people don't know. The voter turnout in my town was 13%. 13%. And that's consistent across the state, like insanely low voter turnouts. And the good thing about that is that these leftists aren't getting in because of a majority as much as they would, look, in my town they have a 6-1 majority. That's not indicative. It's not 70 or 87%, whatever, liberal in my town at all. It's a relatively conservative town. Yeah. So there's room to actually win and see tangible victories, and then you can publicize it and say, hey, look, this happened. And then it's just a snowball effect. And once we get more and more.
Well, that should give us all hope. Right. That we, and I tell people this all the time. Like, people think we're in this deep blue state. Like, no, we're not.
We're not.
We're not. Yeah. Like, and you nailed it. Like, especially at the school board level, there's people, I mean, I've spoken at 200 different churches all over the state in the past 8 years. And I feel like I have a pretty good sense, at least in that community, where things are and how many of those people there are. I mean, in the immigrant community, there's just, I'll be speaking at a church fairly soon, 1,500 members. 1,500 members. I mean, that's a mega church for Massachusetts, right? I mean, 500 members is a mega church for Massachusetts. But there's multiple 1,000-member churches in Massachusetts all over the state, and many of them happen to be immigrant churches, who are totally on our page. But talk about Dighton Rehoboth. I mean, they were the first, as I understand it, school committee to take a supermajority vote to get out of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, right? So now we're seeing a trend. I mean, we saw another policy I didn't mention was DR passed an opt-in to sex ed, which is genius, right? Because just like you have to opt in to go on a field trip or whatever it might be, right? Like, the only people then taking sex ed and the comprehensive sex education that we're talking about are the ones that really want it.
The wackos.
That's such a...
And everyone else can take an elective of what? Math,
reading,
right?
Yeah.
And there was another actually school committee that passed the opt-in that we just found out about as well. And they said that, I don't know if it was unanimous, but it was like a super majority This is an opt-in to sex ed that, again, like we're starting to understand where's the coalition of, everyone and most people in Massachusetts, how do they feel about these things? Well, opt-in is a pretty popular thought. So anyway, it's just super encouraging to see so many good things happening on the school board level. And I think that's only going to continue in Massachusetts.
Yeah. And to wrap up here, I think an interesting reminder for our audience, there's a significant portion of the Republican Party or the right that is all about right now. It's immediate.
Yeah.
We need results now.
Yeah.
The popular example would be in the pro-life community. You've got pro-lifers and then you've got abolitionists, which most pro-lifers are abolitionists, but they don't mean abolitionist in that sense. They mean abolitionist as in like we need to abolish it now. Like we can only support bills that completely abolish it. Like no incrementalism, and that's the point I'm getting at. Is I don't think, and I'm just using that as an example.
Sure,
it's a controversial example to bring
up.
Let's
not debate that to end the podcast.
But
let's get into it.
But we're seeing the fruit of incrementalism in Massachusetts.
Yep.
And when you pass an opt-in, it's not a bill, but when you pass opt-in in Dayton Rehoboth, some people are going to say, well, you're still allowing people to opt into this awful, sex education. Yeah, but it's a step in the right direction. So that's obvious. Like that's the first thing that I think.
Yeah. Well, I think it also pulls back the curtain, like on the Wizard of Oz, if you will. And, you're like, oh my goodness, there must be, a majority of parents that want to take comprehensive sex education, right? And then all of a sudden you give them an opt-in, and let's just say it's 50% that opt in. Well, then you're pulling back that curtain. You're like, wait a minute, like 50% of the school doesn't want this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of the opt-in is then you start to really understand just how many people really want this.
Yeah. So just take note of that, like that incrementalism, it works. It takes a long time.
Yep.
It's not pretty.
Yep.
It's annoying.
Yeah.
But it's how honestly, it's like how the founders designed our nation. They didn't want a government or a leader to just be able to come in and uproot everything. That's why there's you're constantly seeing a 3/4 majority vote in whether it's in the Constitution or in other state constitutions across the nation. Is because the only way we're going to change things is if most people, like the majority of people, want to fundamentally change it.
Yeah.
And as Christians, what we don't just want political change. We want revival. We want people's hearts to be changed.
Right.
So you're looking at that too, and you're like, having church-based learning centers. I bet that there's kids who aren't Christians who are coming to the church-based learning centers and who are like, hey, we just want something else.
Yeah.
We're under the poverty line. We don't have money.
Yeah.
And then now that we're willing to, sacrifice. Maybe we don't believe in God. Maybe whatever. But then you're able to teach the kid, and the parent is like, oh my gosh, what is this? The church does that.
Yeah.
So I think that's my focus is like, wow, the church, what a unique opportunity it is to go back. I mean, that's historic Christianity.
Absolutely.
It's like they saved the babies in Rome.
Yeah.
And they raised those babies up.
Yeah.
And they became Christians, and they became preachers, and they became bishops, and they did all these things.
Yeah.
And they changed the world. And I think that's the key. And wow, it's happening in Massachusetts.
Yeah. And look, I mean, in Worcester, 60% of the kids that attend the Grow Learning Center can go to a K-12 type of, education for $100 a month.
That's incredible.
Not $20,000 per kid, which is the going rate.
Yeah. And the church is able to do it because they're volunteering and they have space, right? I mean, that's powerful. Right. And to your point too, Sam, it's like I always think about this in terms of a tipping point. Like when we talk about incrementalism, it's like, I was thinking in the revolution, for example, 3% of the colonialists fought in the revolution, right? And that's all America needed to defeat one of the most powerful militaries of all time. And I think that concept is still true today, right? Like I'm not calling for revolution, but what I am saying is, we only need 3 to 5% to change this thing. And once we get 3 to 5%, then you start to see like the incrementalism, I think, kind of becomes even quicker.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, I can even see within my own generation, right? When we talk about church-based learning centers, for example, right? Like we have 20 churches right now. right? What if we get to 40? What if we, when that becomes 80, that becomes 160? Like that kind of exponential growth is super exciting.
And you can see that in the left and what they've been able to do.
Right.
Seemingly, because gay marriage, that was 10 years ago that they got that passed in the Supreme Court, right? Am I like around 10, 15
Well,
years
Massachusetts,
ago?
I think it was like 2003, 2004.
Yeah, but at the national level,
right.
at the Supreme
Yeah.
Court,
Yep.
that was 10 to 15 years ago.
Yep.
And now, only 10 years later, we don't know the difference between a man and a woman.
Right.
So that was actually,
Right.
I mean, the foundation for it was laid 100
right.
years ago.
That's right.
But that actually happened pretty quick, to your point. So we have again an opportunity
Yeah.
to really do something
And
here.
they worked at the grassroots level just like we are,
Right.
on the other side. They didn't just go to Maura Healey's office and demand change,
Right.
And like, I'm not doing anything else but trying to get this one bill passed on the highest level possible. Like, that's not gonna work.
Yeah.
It won't work. And even if it does work somehow, it's not gonna change the hearts and minds of the people. That's why the prohibition failed, is because it was a top-down effort that the people didn't support.
Yeah.
And then it got overturned again. So it has to be bottom up.
Right.
That's the only way it's
Yeah.
gonna. That's the only way it's going to work.
Well, and to Hunter's point, it's like, what, in 5 years, they convinced us that a man can be a woman, right? I mean, that's like,
Crazy.
how did they do that, right? Like, we're saying we just want to get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. So, like, we don't have that hard of a challenge. Like, to say, I mean, the fact that you can in 5 years get to that point, goodness, in 1 year, let's get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yeah.
For sure. So if you're a parent, lobby for your school to have an opt-in.
Sure.
If you're a Christian, join a church-based learning center or start one up at your church.
That's
if there
right.
isn't one.
Yep.
And then if you're anybody, if you're those two, run for school committee.
Yeah. If you're 18, like Hunter,
18, there you go.
run for school committee. Yeah.
And if you
And
lose,
if I can help with all of those,
and if I can help with all those, and if you lose, keep running, because we've got to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Want to give any shameless plugs to anything you guys are doing, or new initiatives?
Shameless plugs. Oh my goodness. Many people may not realize that my wife and I breed Bernedoodle puppies. That'd be a good way to end this podcast. I don't have any shameless plugs other than buy a puppy.
Buy a puppy.
And buy a puppy.
There we go. Save the dog. Save the world.
Save the dog. Save the world.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.